It's Saturday, October 12th, 2024, and we are 23 days away from the election. Welcome to today's Make It Make Sense mini-episode. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, since J.D. Vance refused to say that Trump lost the election in 2020 in the debate, he and other Republicans have been trotting out this new line talking about alleged censorship that would have derailed the 2020 election for Biden. Here's what Vance said in today's New York Times interview.
In the debate, you were asked to clarify if you believe Trump lost the 2020 election. Do you believe he lost the 2020 election?
I think that Donald Trump and I have both raised a number of issues with the 2020 election, but we're focused on the future. I think there's an obsession here with focusing on 2020. I'm much more worried about what happened after 2020, which is a wide open border, groceries that are unaffordable. And look,
Senator,
Lulu,
yes or no?
Okay.
Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Let me ask you a question. Is it okay that big technology companies censored the Hunter Biden laptop story, which independent analysis have said cost Donald Trump millions of votes?
Senator Vance, I'm going to ask you again. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Did big technology companies censor a story that independent studies have suggested would have cost Trump millions of votes?
Senator
I think that's
Vance,
the question.
I'm going to ask you again. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020
And I've answered
election?
your question with another question. You answer my question and I'll answer yours.
I have asked this question repeatedly. It is something that is very important for the American people to know. There is no proof, legal or otherwise, that Donald Trump did not lose the 2020 election.
You're repeating a slogan rather than engaging with what I'm saying, which is that when our own technology firms engage in industrial scale censorship, by the way, backed up by the federal government, in a way that independent studies suggest affect the votes, I'm worried about Americans who feel like there were problems in 2020. I'm not worried about this slogan that people throw. Well, every court case went this way. I'm talking about something very discrete, a problem of censorship in this country that I do think affected things in 2020, and more importantly, that led to Kamala Harris's governance, which has screwed this country up in a big way.
Senator, would you have certified the election in 2020? Yes or no?
I've said that I would have voted against certification because of the concern that I just raised. I think that when you have technology companies—
The answer is no.
When you have technology—
So apart from that whole exchange being frustrating and extremely annoying to listen to, Vance was asked 5 times there and decided not only to not tell the truth, but then try to talk about the, quote, big tech censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story. And that is worth unpacking. So the Hunter Biden laptop story, for those of you who don't remember or who mercifully didn't have to pay as close of attention to this thing, it was the story where Rudy Giuliani was given a laptop that had been left at a Delaware computer repair shop owned by a legally blind Trump supporter in a strip mall just outside of Wilmington. I point out this guy is legally blind, not to be ableist about it. There are plenty of people who are legally blind who don't get caught up in things like this. It's only to say that when we were talking about the credibility of what somebody is seeing, that how well they can see is worth mentioning. Now, the laptop supposedly belonged to Hunter Biden. There's still some question as to whether it was actually Hunter Biden's laptop or if it was just a random laptop that had been filled with files linked to Hunter Biden, like his emails. Either way, that part doesn't really matter. What does matter is that this computer shop owner was able to get a hold of the former president's personal attorney, give him this laptop, and then Giuliani shopped it around to several more legitimate news outlets who wanted to know more about where the laptop came from, if they could take a look at it themselves instead of just taking Giuliani's word for it and seeing pictures of it. And Giuliani said no. You know, they just wanted basic journalism stuff there. So instead, Giuliani took it to the New York Post, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, the same guy who owns Fox News and the Wall Street Journal. The Post runs the story and calls the laptop a smoking gun against Biden's 2020 campaign because they said that there were emails on there that showed that Hunter and Joe Biden had arranged some kind of business deal with the Ukrainian gas company in exchange for Biden getting the country's top prosecutor fired by using his powers as the then vice president. So that's more than enough right there, and frankly, it is pretty confusing. But what happens next is right-wing media starts spreading this thing like a wildfire without proof that any of it, or most of it even, is true. And it's worth pointing out here that for months, House Republicans tried to build a case using these emails and this laptop to impeach Joe Biden. But after almost a year, they were never able to present a single piece of evidence proving that Joe Biden had made a corrupt deal or even had a direct, meaningful dealing with Hunter's business partners or his business deals. Not a single piece of evidence, meaning that the laptop saga was in the end totally pointless, unless you're J.D. Vance. So what happens is that as the story spreads on conservative outlets, was that actual journalists started to look into this thing. And at every turn, their sources in American intelligence agencies said that it had all the hallmarks of either being a Russian operation or it was completely fabricated, or both. And a letter signed by 50 high-ranking former intelligence officials said as much at the time. And in 2020, reporters were still dealing with the fallout from the 2016 election, where there were real concerns about Russian collusion and attempts to influence the election. So the bar to publish this story about another possible round of collusion was understandably higher, and nothing that reporters were getting from their sources or their research met those new standards. And as a result of that credible reporting, Twitter and Facebook briefly labeled the Hunter Biden laptop story misinformation and suppressed it from spreading online out of a sense of responsibility to make sure that they weren't helping a foreign spy operation. But that was also short-lived after quite a bit of backlash. And so that is what J.D. Vance is talking about, that brief time where the story was being shut down online. In fact, the story about the story getting shut down was more popular than the actual laptop story itself. The Washington Post looked at those numbers back in 2022. Now, Vance claims that there were independent studies done on the laptop story not getting out there. They aren't independent at all. He's talking about, presumably, because he doesn't actually cite them, a pair of surveys that were done by two right-wing firms, one that used lies and unproven information in its question to people, asking if they'd been told those untrue things, if it would have changed their vote. Well, surprise, surprise, when you tell somebody something really bad, like, say, a presidential candidate was actively involved in foreign corruption, people aren't going to like that. Except, like I said, those things were either unproven or flat out untrue. The other was a firm that also uses some pretty flawed methods, and despite calling itself America's most accurate pollster, ranks 120th on the poll comparison site 538, which is in itself a trusted site. Now, beyond Vance's flawed numbers there's just no evidence to back up what he's saying. Exit polls from the 2020 election clearly show that it was a referendum on Trump. Almost 7 out of 10 voters said they voted for Biden because they were voting against Donald Trump, meaning nothing about Biden specifically would have changed their minds about who Trump was and their motivation for voting against him. We also don't have any credible indication that millions of votes would have been changed. There's just no evidence to back that up at all. It's also worth pointing out here that Vance saying that quote-unquote big tech censoring stories is a huge problem is ignoring the fact that just today, the New York Times is reporting that the Trump-Vance campaign is actively working with X and Elon Musk, so big tech, to censor stories about J.D. Vance. Most recently, the campaign got X to block a story about a pile of leaked documents about J.D. Vance saying some really bad things about Donald Trump in his past and are now coming back to haunt him. That reporter's account was suspended and the story was censored until there was outcry and that reporter got reinstated, but still, that's big tech engaging in the same kind of censorship that J.D. Vance is complaining about here. And now the last thing, and I think the most important takeaway from this, is that by using this line, by answering questions about Trump's attempts to steal the election in 2020 with another question, to use Vance's words, Vance is saying that it was okay for Trump to try and steal the election because he was wronged by social media companies. It's a justification for undermining democracy, and I think that's the most frightening part. That this is the new way that we're going to start hearing questions about 2020 answered. It's not just an answer like, I'm focused on the future. It's saying out loud it was right and just to try to steal the election and inspire an insurrection, and we don't have any remorse about it because we're going to continue to lie about it. Okay, that is it for today's MIMS Mini. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Go ahead and hit that bell so you get notifications for brand new episodes. Also, subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got the extended interview with my guest yesterday, Brian Boyle from American Promise, where we talk a lot more about campaign finance and all the ways that we can fix it right now. And then, as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.